Why did the Alpha King mark a fat Omega like me? The sky over the kingdom of Arkenfall had the color of burnt copper, streaked with crimson from the rising blood moon. It cast a strange light over the sprawling palace, perched on cliffs that overlooked forests dark and endless. Mist curled around its towers, whispering secrets of old magic, old power, and old mistakes. Within these walls, the Alpha King, Kale, ruled with a strength that none dared challenge. His name alone stirred awe and fear, and his eyes, sharp and gray like winter's edge, seemed to see more than anyone wished to show. Far below the palace, in the shadowed streets of the Omega district, lived Leora. She was quiet, kind, and unassuming, a young woman who bore the weight of the world differently than most. Her body was round, soft, and often the subject of whispered jokes from strangers or passing nobles, but she carried within her a spirit no ridicule could touch. Her heart, gentle as spring rain, had learned patience and resilience. She had grown accustomed to being unseen, and in many ways that had become her shield. Tonight, however, her shield would not protect her. The Blood Moon ceremony was the highest event of the year, a night when the Alpha King reaffirmed his power, and the kingdom's hierarchy was displayed for all to witness. Nobles in embroidered silks, warriors in polished armor, and magical practitioners in robes embroidered with silver threads gathered in the palace courtyard. The air thrummed with anticipation. Lanterns glowed like captured stars, their light flickering across stone statues of kings long gone. Leora had not meant to attend. She had never belonged to these circles, never imagined she would step into the palace, let alone the heart of its power. But fate has ways of twisting the path. A small note delivered by a trembling servant summoned her. It was written in Kale's hand, or so the court whispered. "You are needed at the ceremony. Come as you are." Her heart had thumped in both fear and curiosity. Come as she was, she told herself, brushing her hair over her shoulders and straightening her modest dress. A dozen questions arose. Why would the king summon her? What could an Omega like her offer in a court of greatness and fear? But some unknown pull, like a thread tugging from deep inside, had urged her forward. The moment she stepped into the palace courtyard, silence seemed to settle over the crowd. Not the polite hush of decorum, but the sharp stillness of surprise. Eyes that had ignored her all her life now lingered on her presence. Some stared in disbelief, others whispered under their breath. And at the center of it all, Kale watched. His gaze did not sweep over her as a crowd might be scanned. It lingered, precise and calculating. He was taller than any tale had ever suggested, broad-shouldered and impossibly composed. His cloak of dark velvet rippled like smoke in the lantern light. But it was his eyes that unsettled her most, gray, infinite, piercing. They seemed to read every secret, every fear, and every hope she had tried to hide from the world. The ceremony began, a ritual older than anyone in the room could recall. Alphas approached, marked their territory, and renewed their vows to protect their kingdoms. Magic danced in subtle currents through the air, faintly coloring the world in silver and crimson. And then, the moment came that Leora could not have prepared for. Kale stepped forward, away from the others, and approached her. A hush fell over the courtyard, thick and oppressive. The crowd leaned in, curious, eager, fearful. "Leora," Kale said, his voice deep and certain, yet not without a note of surprise. "Come forward." Her legs trembled, but she obeyed, each step heavy with a mix of dread and awe. The blood in her veins felt like molten fire, warming her skin and making her pulse loud in her ears. She reached the center of the courtyard, beneath the blood moon, and stood before him. Kale's hand rose, not in aggression but in command. The air seemed to thrum as he lowered it over her shoulder. Light, warm, and strange pulsed from his fingers, and then he marked her. A symbol, ancient and intricate, appeared faintly glowing on her skin. It burned with a gentle heat that was not painful, yet it made her knees weak. Whispers erupted across the crowd. "Why her? She's an Omega. That's impossible." Leora tried to look away, to shrink from the attention, but Kale's gaze held her fast. And in that gaze she sensed not mockery, not cruelty, but a depth she could not name. "You bear the mark now," Kale said. "The mark of fate. It binds you to me, and to something much greater than either of us can imagine." Fear struck her chest like an icy blade. "Binds me?" she stammered. I don't understand." Kale's eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, a crack in the mask he wore for the world. "You will," he said, "soon enough. But beware, not all who carry the mark survive the trials it brings." The crowd erupted in murmurs, and some nobles laughed behind their hands, sensing scandal or amusement in what they did not understand. Leora felt exposed, raw, and suddenly impossibly small. She wanted to turn away, to run back to the streets that knew her anonymity. But she could not. Something anchored her in place, something powerful and unknown, and it was Kale. As the ceremony ended, Kale turned away, leaving Leora trembling under the eyes of the court. Yet even as she prepared to retreat, she felt it. The mark throbbed softly against her skin, alive with warmth and promise, as though whispering secrets meant only for her. That night in the small chamber where she had been permitted to rest, Leora touched the mark over her shoulder. Her fingers tingled as they brushed the glowing symbol. And then she felt it, an echo of a voice, not spoken aloud but inside her mind. "You carry more than flesh, Omega. You carry a kingdom secret." Leora gasped, her heart pounding in a mixture of awe and terror. She could not understand it, could not even imagine the meaning. And yet the whisper lingered, insistent and warm like a sunbeam breaking through a storm. She sank to the floor, knees pulled to her chest, mind spinning with questions she could not answer. Why her? Why had the Alpha King, feared by all, marked someone like her? And what would the mark demand of her in the days to come? Sleep came fitfully, haunted by shadows of dreams she could barely remember. Kale appeared in them, a constant presence, watching, waiting. Sometimes his expression was harsh, sometimes soft, almost tender. And always the mark pulsed on her skin, connecting them in ways she did not understand. When she awoke, dawn had broken across the palace. Mist still clung to the towers, but the moon had faded, leaving the sky washed in pale gold. Leora dressed quickly, her mind still tangled in the mystery of last night. The servants brought her a simple breakfast, but she could not eat. Her thoughts kept returning to the mark, to Kale, to the whispered warning she had heard. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called, trying to steady her voice. The door opened and a young page entered, bowing quickly. "Mistress Leora, the Alpha King requests your presence. At once." Her stomach turned. She had thought the ceremony was over, that the mark had been a single, strange event. But now it seemed only the beginning. She rose, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her hair and dress. Outside, the palace was waking to the ordinary bustle of day, but Leora saw it through a new lens. Every whisper, every glance, every shadow felt amplified. She could feel eyes on her, and the mark pulsed beneath her sleeve like a heartbeat she could not control. She followed the page through corridors that seemed impossibly long, past guards who nodded with polite distance, and through doors that opened into a chamber flooded with sunlight. Kale stood at the center, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Yet the moment she entered, she noticed something different. The intensity in his eyes softened just slightly, and she realized with a jolt that he had been waiting for her. "You carry the mark well," Kale said simply, voice deep and measured. "But do not think it is merely decoration. It is a bond, a test, and perhaps a warning." Leora's chest tightened. "A warning?" she asked. Kale nodded once sharply. "The mark will not be kind. You will learn its purpose in time. Some will fear it, some will covet it. And some will try to destroy it, and you along with it." Fear, awe, and a strange, unbidden curiosity swelled in Leora's chest. She had never been noticed like this before, never held in such focus, such weight. And yet the thought of what she was bound to feel almost irresistible, as if her very life had taken a turn she could not deny. Kale extended his hand, not for command, not for threat, but almost as an invitation. "Come closer," he said. Leora stepped forward, heart hammering in her chest, and as she did, she felt it, the mark thrumming against her skin, alive and waiting. Something had begun, something neither she nor Kale could yet name. And Leora knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, that her life had changed forever. The palace walls, the blood moon, and the whispered magic had all set the stage. And now, the first act of a story far greater than herself had begun. She did not know what awaited her. But one thing was certain. Her fate was no longer her own. The morning sun filtered through the palace windows, painting the chamber in warm gold. Leora sat at the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the faint glow of the mark on her shoulder. Though the blood moon had disappeared, the mark remained alive, pulsing gently as if it had its own heartbeat. Each thrum sent shivers through her, a constant reminder that she was no longer simply an observer in the world of Arkenfall. She was a participant. A soft rap at the door startled her. "Enter," she called, voice still husky from sleep. The door opened to reveal Kale, his cloak draped over his shoulders, eyes sharp as always, but his expression softer than she had seen before. There was no army of guards with him, no ceremonial distance. He stepped inside and the very air seemed to shift around him. "Leora," he said, voice low, carrying authority yet calm, "it is time we begin your training. You carry the mark now, and with it comes knowledge you must learn. Not everyone survives the lessons of the mark, but you may if you are willing." Leora's stomach nodded. "Training?" she asked. "I don't understand. I am just an Omega. Why would I need training?" Kale's eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not look angry. "The mark does not choose the weak. It chooses those who can bear responsibility. You may think of yourself as small, Leora, but you have strength you do not yet know." She swallowed hard, unsure whether to feel honored or terrified. The quiet strength she had clung to all her life suddenly seemed fragile in the presence of someone as commanding as Kale. Yet beneath the fear, there was a flicker of curiosity. Perhaps, she thought, this was why she had been summoned. The first lesson was simple, though not easy. Kale led her through the palace gardens, which were more maze than garden, their paths twisting through fountains and shadowed alcoves. The air smelled of wet earth and wild herbs, and the morning mist curled like ghosts along the cobblestones. "Focus," Kale said, his voice calm but firm. "The mark is not just a symbol, it is a connection. You feel its pulse because it is alive, and it will guide you if you learn to listen. Close your eyes." Leora hesitated, then obeyed. The world blurred into darkness behind her eyelids, and she felt the faint warmth of the mark pressing against her skin. Kale stood near her, his presence a steadying force. She could sense his heartbeat, strong and controlled, and the hum of magic that seemed to flow between them. "Do not resist it," Kale continued. "Feel it. Do not fight. Let it tell you what it wants." She took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the mark seep into her chest, and then a rush of images and emotions swirled around her. Shadows of the palace, flickering faces, whispers of secrets that had long been buried. She saw Kale as a young man, fierce and unbroken, yet haunted by loss and guilt. She felt the pulse of his pain, the burden of his crown, and the weight of a curse she could not yet name. Leora opened her eyes, startled. I saw things. I saw you when you were younger in pain, and something else, a darkness you carry." Kale's gaze softened, but only briefly. "Few notice it, fewer understand it. The curse is old, Leora. It touches everything I hold dear and leaves nothing untouched. You must learn what it is, for it will demand more from both of us than either can bear." She shivered. The thought of being bound to such power and pain was frightening. Yet, somewhere in her chest, a strange thrill stirred. She did not know if it was fear or longing or something else entirely. Perhaps all three. The days that followed were a careful balance of instruction and testing. Kale pushed her to her limits, though never cruelly. He asked her to decipher ancient texts, to sense the faint currents of magic hidden in the palace, and to follow him into places she had never dared enter. The shadowed library, the forbidden towers, and even the castle dungeons, where silence seemed alive with whispers. Leora found herself learning not just about the mark, but about herself. She could sense danger before it arrived, detect faint traces of magic that others missed, and feel the subtle shifts in Kale's moods. With every lesson, her respect for him grew, though it was mixed with fear and a peculiar curiosity she could not name. Kale, in turn, seemed to change as well. He no longer treated her as fragile or weak. He challenged her, questioned her, and at times allowed her to challenge him. Their conversations became battles of wit and insight, subtle and sharp, with laughter occasionally slipping through the tension. In these moments, the cold, unyielding Alpha seemed almost human, and Leora began to see a man capable of warmth and doubt, not just authority. One evening, after a long day of study and practice, Kale led her to the palace balcony. The sun had dipped low and the horizon glowed with gold and crimson. The kingdom stretched out below, forests and rivers bathed in fading light. "You are learning quickly," Kale said quietly, not as a teacher but almost as a companion. "But the mark is more than knowledge. It is a bond. It will test you in ways no lessons can prepare you for, and you may discover things about me, things you may not like." Leora's fingers brushed the mark unconsciously. I do not know if I can handle it," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "It is too much sometimes. The power, the visions, Kale's gaze softened. You will handle it because you have no choice, and because you are stronger than you think." Her cheeks warmed. She wanted to protest, to argue that she was not strong, not ready, but the words caught in her throat. There was truth in his eyes, in the way he looked at her, not judgment but expectation. And somewhere beneath that expectation, a flicker of something else, perhaps care, perhaps curiosity, stirred. Days turned into weeks. Whispers spread through the court, as they always did, about the Omega marked by the Alpha King. Some laughed, some sneered, some were curious. Leora ignored them. She focused on the lessons, the mark, and the strange connection that bound her to Kale. One night, Kale summoned her to the Hall of Mirrors, a long chamber lined with polished glass. The room reflected endless copies of them, their movements, their expressions. He instructed her to focus, to find the center of the reflections and to face herself, not just her body but her fears, her desires, and her potential. "You must know yourself," Kale said, "before you can know the power of the mark, and before you can face the curse that shadows me." Leora looked at the countless reflections, each one slightly distorted, each one revealing a different part of herself she rarely acknowledged. The mirrors seemed to mock her insecurities, showing every curve, every shadow, every fear. But as she stared longer, she also saw something she had never allowed herself to notice: her strength, her persistence, and a spark of courage she had hidden even from herself. Kale stepped close. She could feel the warmth of his presence, the subtle power that radiated from him. "Do not be afraid of what you see," he said. "You are not your fears, and you are not alone." Something shifted in her chest, a mixture of longing and fear, desire and confusion. She looked up into his eyes, and for the first time the distance between them felt smaller, almost intimate, though she dared not name it. Before she could respond, the mirrors shimmered and a vision appeared, an image of the kingdom in darkness, Kale alone, shadowed and cursed, and her standing at his side, the mark glowing brightly. The vision pulsed with urgency, as if warning her. "You see it," Kale said softly. "The curse grows stronger. It will not wait for us to be ready. You must learn quickly, or we may lose everything." Leora swallowed, heart pounding. I will try," she whispered, unsure if her words were enough, but determined to face whatever was coming. Kale nodded once sharply. "Good. That is all I ask for now. Trust in yourself and in the bond. The rest will come in time." As she left the hall, her mind was a storm of thoughts and emotions. She felt the weight of the mark, the pull of the visions, and the strange connection she could not explain. Every step back to her chambers reminded her that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. That night, alone in her room, she traced the mark on her shoulder. It glowed faintly in the darkness, pulsing as if alive. She whispered into the quiet, "I will not fail, I will not fail him, I will not fail the kingdom." A chill brushed her skin and she shivered. From the shadows, a voice, not Kale's but echoing in her mind, whispered again. "The curse waits, and so do your choices, Omega. Choose wisely or lose everything." Her heart raced. The first threads of fear, desire, and responsibility tangled within her, and she realized that the true test was only just beginning. The forest outside Arkenfall stretched endlessly, dark and tangled. Mist clung to the trunks of ancient trees, and the moon, though hidden behind clouds, cast a faint silver light on the twisted paths. Few dared enter this place, for it was said to be alive with spirits and shadows, testing anyone who walked its winding trails. Kale led Leora along the narrow path, cloak brushing against branches and leaves. He moved silently, every step careful and deliberate, as though the forest itself obeyed him. Leora followed, heart racing with a mix of fear and anticipation. This was not just a journey through the forest. It was a journey through power, destiny, and the bond of the mark that tied them together. "Stay close," Kale said, voice calm but firm. "The forest does not forgive carelessness. It senses doubt and weakness." Leora nodded, clutching the mark on her shoulder unconsciously. It pulsed softly beneath her fingers as if guiding her. I understand," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional distant cry of a night creature. The deeper they went, the thicker the mist became, swirling around them like living smoke. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, forming shapes that almost seemed human. "This place, it feels alive," Leora whispered, shivering. Kale's gaze flicked to her, sharp as ever. "It is alive. It reacts to your fear, your courage, and even your thoughts. That is why the forest is a test. Only those who can face themselves and each other will pass through unharmed." Leora swallowed hard. "Face ourselves? What do you mean?" Kale's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You must confront your fears, your doubts, and your desires. And I will be forced to do the same. The forest will not allow either of us to hide." As they progressed, the air grew colder and the shadows longer. Leora could feel the forest probing at her mind, stirring memories she had tried to forget. Times she had been mocked, times she had been overlooked, moments of quiet shame and longing. Yet beneath the discomfort, she found the first hints of courage. The mark on her shoulder seemed to guide her, whispering strength, reminding her that she was not alone. They reached a small clearing where the moonlight broke through the trees, illuminating a pool of water so still it reflected the sky perfectly. Kale stopped and gestured toward it. "The first trial," he said. "Look into the water, Leora, do not turn away. The forest will show you who you are and who you could become." Leora hesitated, but something in Kale's eyes, fierce, commanding, yet not cruel, gave her courage. She stepped closer to the pool and stared into the mirror-like surface. At first, she saw only herself, her round face, her soft shoulders, her uncertain expression. But slowly, the reflection shifted. She saw herself taller, stronger, moving with confidence, commanding the attention of those who had once ignored her. She saw herself standing beside Kale, not as a follower, but as an equal. Then the reflection changed again, showing her failing, her courage faltering, her confidence shattered, the mark fading from her skin. The forest whispered around her, teasing her fear, feeding on doubt. Leora's chest tightened. I can't," she murmured, stepping back. Kale reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "Do not run," he said softly. "This is part of the trial. You must face yourself, all of yourself. Strength comes from facing your fears, not ignoring them." Taking a deep breath, Leora stepped forward again. She forced herself to stare into the reflection, to accept both the strong and the weak parts of herself. She let the mark pulse beneath her fingers, guiding her, reminding her of the bond and the power she carried. Slowly, the reflection stabilized. Leora saw herself as she was, brave, uncertain, flawed, yet capable of incredible strength. The forest seemed to breathe around her, approving silently. Kale stepped beside her, his presence steadying. "Well done," he said quietly. "You faced the first trial. But there are more to come. Each will test not just you but both of us, and some may reveal truths we are not ready to see." The forest seemed to respond to his words. Shadows lengthened, twisting into shapes that resembled Kale's past, visions of battles, moments of grief, and fleeting flashes of sorrow. Leora realized the trials were not hers alone. She was seeing Kale's memories, his pain, and the curse that had haunted him for years. She reached out instinctively, touching his arm. "Kale, you've been through so much," she said softly. I want to help." Kale's eyes met hers, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his stoic mask. "The curse, it has made me what I am. But perhaps with the mark with you, there is a chance to change, to heal. You may be the only one who can do it, Leora." Her heart ached at his words, a mixture of fear, empathy, and an unspoken longing. She realized that the bond between them was more than the mark. It was a connection of trust, responsibility, and something deeper she could not yet name. They moved deeper into the forest, facing more trials. Some were physical, narrow paths that required careful balance, shadowy figures that tested their reflexes and courage. Others were mental, confronting illusions that whispered doubt and fear into their minds. In each challenge, Leora felt the mark's pulse guiding her, strengthening her resolve. At one point, a shadow rose before them, taking the shape of a massive wolf. Its eyes glowed red, and its presence radiated power and danger. Leora froze, but Kale stepped forward, placing himself between her and the creature. "Do not be afraid," he said, voice firm. "This is only a reflection of fear. Face it with me." Together they moved toward the shadow, and as their hands brushed, a spark of warmth passed between them. Not the heat of fire, but the warmth of trust and connection. Leora felt her courage grow, and when they reached the shadow, it dissolved into mist, leaving them unharmed. Exhausted, they stopped at a small glade, where the moonlight broke through the canopy, bathing them in silver light. Leora sank to the ground, her hands pressed to her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. Kale knelt beside her. "You did well," he said quietly. "Stronger than you realize." Her heart pounded, not just from exhaustion but from the nearness of him, the shared trials and the unspoken tension between them. She looked up at him, unsure how to voice the swirl of feelings within her. Kale's eyes softened, and he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Leora, the forest reveals more than fear. It shows us our potential, and sometimes it shows us what we could lose if we are not careful." Her fingers touched the mark on her shoulder, and she felt it pulsing stronger than ever. The bond between them seemed to hum in the air, a quiet reminder that they were connected in ways neither fully understood. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the glade, carrying a whisper of danger. Leora's hair whipped around her face, and the mark burned with urgency. She felt the pull of the forest, stronger now, guiding her to a path she could not see. "Kale," she whispered, fear and determination in her voice. "It's something else, something coming." Kale's expression hardened. "The forest is testing us still. Be ready, Leora. Whatever comes next will demand everything we have, our courage, our strength, and perhaps our hearts." Together they rose, side by side, the bond of the mark connecting them in ways words could not describe. Leora realized, with a mix of awe and fear, that she could not imagine facing the trials without him. And perhaps she did not want to. The forest grew darker, more alive with shadows, and the path ahead seemed endless. But with Kale beside her, she felt a flicker of hope, a spark of courage, and the first hint of something she could not yet name: trust. longing, and the possibility of love. As they stepped forward, the shadows shifted, forming shapes that hinted at dangers yet unseen. Leora felt the mark throb violently against her skin, a warning, a guide, and a promise. She reached for Kale's hand, and he did not hesitate to take it. The connection was electric, silent, and powerful. Together, they moved forward into the unknown. The cursed forest grew silent as Leora and Kale advanced. The mist swirled thickly around them, hiding the path and creating shadows that seemed alive. The air carried a tension that pressed against Leora's chest, yet she did not let herself falter. Kale walked beside her, his hand brushing hers lightly at times, a grounding presence amid the uncertainty. "You are ready," Kale said quietly. "The forest has tested courage, wisdom, and heart, but now it will demand sacrifice. Are you prepared?" Leora's fingers brushed the mark on her shoulder, and she felt it pulsing with urgency. The mark had guided her through the previous trials, whispering strength when she feared to falter. Now it burned with a heat that seemed almost alive. She swallowed, her throat tight. I have to be ready. For you, for the kingdom, and for myself." Kale's gray eyes softened, revealing the vulnerability he rarely showed. "Then we face it together," he said. The words were simple, but the promise behind them carried weight she could feel in her bones. Ahead, a shadowy figure emerged from the mist. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes glowing like embers. The forest had conjured its final challenge, the guardian of the curse. Its presence radiated power, the weight of centuries of magic pressing down on them. Leora's heart hammered, but she did not step back. Kale stepped forward, standing in front of her. "The curse is old, relentless, and it will try to break both of us. Remember the bond. Trust it, trust me, and trust yourself." The guardian raised its hands, and the forest trembled. Shadows reached for them, twisting into shapes that reflected their deepest fears. Leora saw her insecurities, her doubts, and visions of failure. Kale's face appeared in the shadows, twisted by pain and guilt, the weight of the curse reflected in every motion. Leora took a deep breath. "We are not afraid," she said, her voice firm despite the fear racing through her chest. "We will face this together." The guardian roared, a sound that shook the very trees. Shadows lunged at them, but Leora felt the mark on her shoulder flare. Its warmth spread through her, steadying her pulse. She could feel Kale's presence through the bond, strong and unwavering, and together they stepped forward. The first wave of shadows tested their physical strength. Leora stumbled, but Kale caught her, steadying her with a hand at her waist. "Focus on the bond," he urged. "Let it guide you." The mark pulsed again, and Leora felt a surge of courage. She raised her hands, and the shadows recoiled slightly, as though sensing her newfound resolve. Kale mirrored her movements, and together they pushed through, step by step, until the first wave dissolved into mist. The guardian did not retreat. Its eyes glowed brighter, and the forest seemed to press in closer. Leora felt a fear unlike anything she had experienced, the kind that made her doubt her strength, her courage, and even her bond with Kale. She closed her eyes, letting the mark's warmth anchor her. She focused on Kale, on the trust and care that had grown between them, and on the courage she had discovered within herself. When she opened her eyes, the guardian had grown larger, more menacing. But Leora felt a clarity she had never known. She stepped forward, holding Kale's hand firmly. "We are ready," she said. "Do not test us any further." The guardian surged forward, shadows flaring, and Kale moved instinctively to shield her. The bond pulsed violently, connecting them, filling the air with a light that seemed to push back the darkness. Leora felt it deep within her chest. The mark was alive, a conduit of courage, strength, and unity. She understood in that moment that she had power beyond what she had imagined, not over the guardian itself, but over the fear and doubt it wielded. Together, they advanced, and the guardian's shadowy form wavered. Leora spoke, her voice firm and unwavering. "You cannot break us. We are stronger together. We are bound not by fear but by trust and courage. Leave us or be undone." The guardian faltered, the shadows collapsing around it, and then, with a final cry that echoed through the forest, it dissolved into mist. The trees shivered as if releasing a long-held breath, and silence fell, thick and peaceful. Cale lowered his hand from hers, though he remained close. "You did it," he said quietly, awe in his voice. "You faced the trials, and you were stronger than even I expected." Leora's knees trembled, but she held her ground. "I did it with you. I could not have done it alone." Cale's gaze softened, and he stepped closer. "No," he admitted. "You are not just strong. You are remarkable. The mark chose you because you could bear it. Not because of what it gives you, but because of who you are." A warmth spread through Leora's chest, a mixture of pride, relief, and something deeper she could not name. For the first time she felt seen, not just as an Omega, not just as someone marked by power, but as herself, brave, capable, and worthy. The forest seemed to recognize the change. Mist lifted slightly, revealing a path that led back toward the palace. The night had not fully surrendered to dawn, but the first hints of light painted the horizon. Leora and Cale walked side by side, the bond between them strong and unbroken. As they emerged from the forest, the palace appeared in the distance, towers glimmering in the soft light. The kingdom lay quiet, unaware of the trials that had unfolded in the dark woods beyond. Leora looked at Cale, and he returned her gaze with a mixture of pride, relief, and something she could not name. When they reached the palace, Cale led her to the highest balcony. The rising sun cast gold and crimson across the sky, illuminating the kingdom below. The view was breathtaking, and Leora felt the full weight of what they had accomplished. The curse had been confronted, the trials survived, and the bond between them solidified in a way that neither could deny. Cale turned to her, gray eyes filled with a rare softness. "Leora, the mark has done more than guide you. It has shown me what I have been blind to for far too long. Strength does not always come from power or fear. It comes from courage, from heart, and from those who stand beside us." Leora felt her cheeks warm. "And I have learned so much. About myself, about you, and about what it means to trust, even when it is frightening." Cale took her hand gently. "You have changed me, Leora. The curse may have shaped me, but you have awakened something I thought I had lost." A breeze swept past them, carrying the scent of flowers and fresh air from the palace gardens. Leora pressed her hand to the mark, now glowing faintly, steady and calm. The trials had not ended it, they had transformed it. It was no longer a symbol of fear or uncertainty. It was a symbol of courage, connection, and hope. Cale leaned slightly closer, voice soft. "You were never just marked, Omega. You were always chosen." Leora's heart swelled with emotion. She had never imagined hearing such words, never believed that someone like Cale could see her, not for her body, not for her title, but for the person she had become. And yet, here he was, offering her recognition, respect, and something deeper that she could not yet name. The palace below began to stir with life. Servants moving through corridors, guards patrolling the towers, and birds singing their morning songs. Leora felt the kingdom awake around them, and for the first time she felt a part of it, not as an outsider, not as someone overlooked, but as someone essential, someone capable, someone chosen. Cale remained beside her, silent, watching the horizon. "The trials are over," he said, "but the future is ours to face together." Leora nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "Together," she echoed. The word carried weight, promise, and certainty. For the first time in her life, she felt the full depth of her own power, the strength of the bond between her and Cale, and the hope of a life no longer dictated by fear or doubt. She had faced shadows, confronted fear, and survived the trials of heart and spirit. And now she was ready for whatever came next. The mark pulsed softly, warm and steady, and Leora knew it would continue to guide her. But she also knew that its greatest gift was not power, but the connection it had forged, the courage to face herself, and the bond that had grown between her and the Alpha King. Kale turned to her, gray eyes holding hers, and for a moment the world fell away. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the rhythm of their shared heartbeat and the soft light of dawn. "You are remarkable," Kale whispered. "And I am grateful you were chosen." Leora felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of pride, relief, and something tender, new, and unspoken. "And I am grateful for you," she replied. The wind stirred again, carrying the promise of a new day. The trials were behind them, the curse lifted, and the kingdom safe. But more than that, Leora knew that their journey of courage, trust, and the bond of the mark was only beginning. Together they watched the sun rise over Arkenfall, a kingdom of shadows and light, of fear and hope, of trials and triumph. And in that moment, Leora understood the truth of her own power, the strength of the bond, and the promise of a future where she was no longer unseen. She was chosen, she was strong, and she was no longer afraid.